Good morning and welcome to the Morning Scoop for Thursday, September 30th. This is your daily Buckeye fix. I'm Tom Orr. The Rutgers game is in 2 days, the game against Michigan in 58 days. The Ohio State football team got things back on track in a lot of ways against Akron. And while, yes, it was just Akron, there may be some indications that they're really addressing some of the issues that have finally, plagued them throughout the season so far. So I can say that with confidence because Ross Fulton said it this week at BuckeyeScoop.com. He is our X's and O's guru. He is also my guest this morning. Ross, thanks for joining me.
Happy to be here, Tom.
So, one thing you've been very critical about this season is how predictable they've been, especially on defense. But you saw them trying to break some of those tendencies against Akron with, something you've been calling for them to do for a while now. Can you explain pre-rotating the safeties, what it means when they do it, why it's important to not do it?
Yeah, I would go on defense. I would go beyond saying they're just breaking tendencies. If you didn't know the uniform colors, you would think that they were two entirely different teams. It's that much of a change from what they were doing the first 2 weeks of the season, and frankly, like the last couple of years, to what they did against Akron. Yes, they're not pre-rotating the safeties, which means when you pre-rotate, you have one down in the box and one high because you're running a single high coverage. But they're not pre-rotating the safeties because they're not running a lot of single high coverages anymore. They're running a lot of split safety zones. So cover two, cover four, quarter, half. And so it makes sense to not pre-rotate when you're as likely to run something with split safeties as you are with a middle of the field safety.
So, running those different coverages. I mean, they had been, we've talked a lot about how heavy they've been in the single high, whether it's one or cover three. But I mean, how likely is it that the changes that you saw against Akron are something that's going to stick around? Is that something that they just did because they knew they could do literally anything against Akron and still win? Or is this something that maybe you'd look to continue and might make them a little less predictable on defense?
It would be really odd if they just decided to do it against Akron just because and then revert it. I mean, it would just be a waste. I can't imagine they wouldn't continue to do it. They are playing better and they look more confident, and mixing up coverages and alignment and blitzes is like sort of like, as I said in my article, like they look like a normal defense. And I mean that in the best sense of the word. Like they look like every other defense you see out there in major college and in the NFL. And so, they overdid it a little bit against Akron so that like teams can't expect as much single high, and they'll play maybe a little bit more of cover one, cover three going forward. But like, even with that, I would be shocked and disappointed, to be frank, if they reverted back. I mean, that would be like taking a step forward and three steps back.
This is something that you've been talking about for weeks now. I mean, we've had you on after every game and you've been talking about this for weeks, and you talked about it a little bit last year. I mean, this is not a new thing. Why did it take so long to make obviously these changes just got implemented in a relatively short amount of time. So this is not something you needed like 12 months to implement. What took so long to make these changes that were, not necessarily obvious to every fan, but obvious to you, obviously? I mean, you've been talking about it, writing about it for a while. So why did this take so long to make this change happen?
I mean, you'd have to give a Ryan Day true serum. I mean, it'd be a fascinating, behind the scenes discussion. What they did against Akron, I honestly did not think were changes that were possible for this defense, because I assumed that they had spent so much time practicing single high coverages. Like I didn't even think that they maybe had cover four, for instance, installed. So they obviously did. So to me, that suggests like the only way you could make this wholesale of a change is you probably installed those things in the off season. So, I think this is like the great question is was it Ryan Day who's been so insistent on playing single high and he finally relented after what happened against Oregon? Or was the plan in the offseason, like, they put the bullet in place that allows them to do this? Because like when we use, I really don't like the term bullet, as I've told you. Like I wish we just call the guy strong safety because it makes a lot more sense to people. So they went to a 4-2-5 with two deep safeties and then a slot corner, which they call the cover safety. So, which allows them to do this stuff. So then it makes you wonder, well, maybe they installed all this stuff during the offseason, and then in the heat of the game, Kerry Combs just kept calling the same, 4-3, setting the 3 technique to the tight end and cover 3 and cover 1. And maybe that's why Ryan Day just finally threw up his hands and was like, I want to put someone in that can mix up what all the things we worked on in the offseason. So everyone's guess is as good as mine. I tend to lean towards maybe it's the latter, simply because it would be hard to spend like the Tuesday of a game week installing cover 4 and like quarter half. Like those are things that take reps, and like we'll see going forward how well they execute them now that opponents know that they're going to do it. And so like, the jury's still out somewhat, but you have to think that they were prepared to do all this stuff, and it just like got lost the first few weeks with Kerry Combs and has been, brought back under Barnes.
Well, in addition to the schematic changes we've talked about and the coaching change you just mentioned there, they've also made some personnel changes on the back end of the defense. Can you explain what they're doing with the various safety spots you just talked about? Who is where now? Because it's a different lineup than it was a couple weeks ago. So who is where right now, and how you think that's working?
Yeah. So again, using their nomenclature, the Bullets position has somewhat changed, because like when they do single high coverages, he still is up over the tight end. So he is a strong safety, but when they go split safeties, he is, or a line that way pre-snap, he is to the boundary or the short side of the field. And then the free safety, or the guy we think of as sort of the deep safety, is now what I would consider the field safety. And the best comparison I have is what Von Bell, when the Ohio State won the national championship, they were like strictly a cover 4 team. And that was the spot that they had Von Bell. And so now they've moved Latham Ransom back to that, which is somewhat been enabled by Cam Martinez. I personally think that's a good fit for both of them. I never quite understood why they wanted Latham Ransom as essentially like a slot cornerback playing man coverage all the time. I think he fits that field safety spot, and I think Martinez is more of like a slot corner. And so, against Akron, obviously Josh Proctor got hurt. Bryson Shaw has been starting, to decidedly mixed results. Against Akron, Ransom and Shaw rotated. I think even more than a deep safety, I'm not sure that Bryson Shaw is at all a fit to be like a field cover 4 safety. And so I personally expect that Ransom will more and more overtake that position going forward. And I just, when you give me those, when you put Hickman and Ransom and Cam Martinez together as your safeties, and then the corners have played well, like suddenly to me, that seemed like this is a defensive backfield that you can win with. Whereas like before it was a decidedly mixed bag.
So, I mean, it sounds like you approve of the personnel changes. You obviously approve of the schematic changes, since you were saying, hey, they should do this, and then they did it. So that's obviously another thumbs up from you. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think that's probably a reasonable representation of your position. So what percentage, fixed is this defense? If you want to grade 2019 as 100%, where were they at the beginning of the season? And where are they now? And then how much better do you think they can actually get this year? Can they get to, 2019 is probably not a reasonable bar, but how close can they get to that type of defense if things continue to progress?
Yeah. So I think they pretty much hit rock bottom after Oregon. Like they were basically running the same defense. Any opponent can, exploit that. And then they weren't even executing. They just weren't even on the same page. Now ironically, they're doing more stuff on defense, but the players look more bought in and more locked in terms of what they're supposed to be doing. They're picking up a little confidence, you can see. So, I agree. I don't think they're going to be at 2019 just simply because of personnel. I think, the defensive and pass rush remains an issue until that's resolved. The linebacker play is still spotty, I don't, Cody Simon continues to struggle to stay healthy. They need him at Mike. I personally think Steel Chambers should be playing more and more will linebacker, but that's, a whole other issue of already with the seniors and like sort of getting passed over, and Mitchell's a captain. So they probably at best can rotate those two. But I do think that they can be better than they were last year, just because, again, they did the same thing over and over last year, and, it's hard to do that. So I think, again, if they can get themselves, they've already moved up 10 spots in SP plus from like 41 to 32 or so. I think, again, if they can get themselves into 20-ish range, even maybe high teens, like they're going to be in pretty good shape. As I said, they are certainly pointed in the right direction. It's kind of a shame that it took a loss to get them there, but definitely feel better about it than I did a couple weeks ago.
I would think every Ohio State fan is probably kind of nodding along, going, "Yeah, it looks a lot better than it did," and they might not be able to explain why, but it definitely looks a lot better than it did. Yeah, obviously, the defense has kind of been what we've spent virtually all of this fall talking about because that's where the issues have been. But on offense, they made a couple little tweaks as well, which I think it's surprising how something relatively small can turn into a big thing. One of the things you wrote about was just where the running back was lined up. So why would that matter? What did they do to change it? And how did that play out in the game?
Yeah, I mean, I think people intuitively can get this, right. So if you have if you're in the shotgun and you have a halfback, or he's next to the quarterback as opposed to as deep as a tailback, it's harder to run to the same side as the halfback, especially on zone plays. You tended to run opposite the halfback, and so defenses obviously know that. And so they tend to, especially if you're especially based on where the halfback is versus the tight end, can tell a lot of tendencies for Ohio State. So they tend to slant away from the tailback, or they'll play games trying to guess essentially which way you're running. And so, I always harp on that they need to run towards the halfback side. Now, what under Urban Meyer, how they handled that a lot is they ran the quarterback. And so if you're going to overplay the halfback, the quarterback will just keep. Now, obviously, Ohio State's not doing that with Ryan Day and with the current quarterbacks. And so you need to do other things to fix that. And so, a couple of things they did on Saturday that stood out is that quick toss sweep to Travion Henderson. And then, they did the little pop passes towards Henderson's side. And then they are doing other things to run the ball to the halfback side or doing more pistols. So again, this was a problem against Oregon. It was obviously not as big of a problem as the defense was, but they did get themselves in trouble by being a little too predictable in the run game. And so they clearly are trying to work on that. And obviously then getting Henderson the ball in space is also a good idea for them.
Yeah, getting Travion Henderson the ball anywhere has worked out pretty well for them so far this year. One other thing that you wrote about was they kind of mix things up with their blocking scheme a little bit. Can you explain sort of just how they did that? And again, why that maybe makes them a better offense long-term?
Yeah. And then this is sort of, again, like a smaller point, but when they get in trouble, they tend to be a little stale and being overly reliant on mid zone and wide zone. Like those will always be their main run plays. But again, like anything else, if you do it to something too much, it makes it predictable. And so they've been the last 2 weeks much done a lot more gap blocking. And so as I discussed in my article, like the easiest way I can describe the difference is like, if you're zone blocking, you're blocking towards the running play called. So if it's called to the right, the offensive line stepping to the right. Gap blocking, you're blocking down on the play side. So if the play is called to the right, the right side of the offensive line is blocking down and creating double teams and getting to the second level, whether that's duo or counter tray. There's different ways to do it. But so they're mixing those in more. So again, you're just giving different looks. You also have an offensive line that's very large, and so is very good at gap blocking, establishing double teams at the point of attack and getting the running back downhill. So again, I think, ironically, like duo and counter trade may have been maybe two of their best running plays so far. So they were not only benefiting from breaking tendencies, but those plays in themselves, they've been pretty successful with gap blocking schemes thus far.
This is a huge weekend coming up for the Rutgers football team. It's a big one for Ohio State too, but for Rutgers, this feels like this could be a signature win for Greg Schiano and the Rutgers program if they could pull it off somehow. Ohio State's like a 2-touchdown underdog, which is like 5 touchdowns less than the last time they were at Rutgers. So I'm sort of expecting Greg Schiano to just sort of throw the kitchen sink at it this weekend. What is Rutgers going to do? What have you seen out of Rutgers? What are you expecting them to try and do this weekend?
Yeah, I mean, I think you'll see some of the same stuff they used against Michigan, which like beyond like sort of the trick plays, where they, the 4th and 1 sneak with the halfback or the quarterback was like looking, like the old like it's like the equivalent in baseball of like, I don't know where the ball is. You have a couple things. So they were pretty aggressive bringing a safety on pressure to try to limit the Michigan running game. I expect you'll see, especially on early downs, the same thing. And, they use this a tilted nose guard technique. And so basically the nose tackle is pointing himself at an angle right at the center's face mask, essentially. And so you don't really see it that much anymore. And it caused some issues for Ohio State last year. It caused some issues for Michigan last week. And so, dealing with that will be critical. And then offensively, Ohio State has to be ready to defend the quarterback run game. And like Rutgers ran power read, which again it was so popular like 5 years ago, and it's kind of gone out of style, but they ran it over and over again. And then they ran RPOs off of it. So it will test how well Ohio State has done in terms of, diversifying the scheme and handling assignments within it. I personally, maybe I'm wrong. I do feel like Ohio State is trending in the right direction and will be prepared. Hopefully you'll have a healthy CJ Stroud, which will help. But yeah, will certainly provide a sterner test.
You mentioned the safety crashing out. I mean, that's something that I am not a Ross Fulton, but even I was watching the game. I'm like, hey, there's a guy flying like a banshee, crashing down in a lot of those run situations. Is that something Ohio State can maybe take advantage of with RPOs, with play action? I mean, something like that. Just if you're expecting that, they got you basically almost a screen pass. Like you let the blitzer come in and you dump it right over him. Is that something that Ohio State can take advantage of?
Yes, I mean that's obviously the big difference with Michigan right now. Is Ohio State's much more explosive in the passing game, and so they were able to do that last year against Rutgers. And hit a bunch of big plays, especially on the outside. And so, this would be a good game for them to get Chris Olave back on track. And obviously you got to complete them, but work the ball down the field and some of those deep over routes also you saw this past week.
Well, this is I'm glad we had you on because I was watching that Akron game and kind of going, it looks different. It looks better, but it is just Akron. So you never know quite how much to read into it. But it sounds like there may be something really, truly there. So Ross, thank you for joining me. Always love these shows. They're some of our most popular every week. So if you want to read Ross's article, you can find it on the front page of BuckeyesScoop.com. You can also find all sorts of other great content there from our fantastic team of insiders. Plus, on our Ask the Insiders board, you can ask us questions. You can talk about the team. You can talk about whatever we want to talk about. Lots of fun conversations, very lively conversations on there right now. So sign up today to become a member at BuckeyesScoop.com. And also, if you are watching on YouTube, hit the little bell. That'll subscribe you to our channel. Then you'll get notified every time we post a new video, every time we do a live player interviews, coach interviews, live pregame shows, postgame shows. All that stuff is all for free at youtube.com/BuckeyeScoop. Just hit that little bell or hit the little Buckeye Scoop logo at the end of this video that'll pop up on the screen. That'll subscribe you to our channel. And then you'll get notified every time we post a new video, every time we go live, so you never miss a thing. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.